Latin America has produced great athletes in many sports throughout history. Great athletes who have made their way into the history books of each of the sports that exist on this planet. And in motorsports, it's no different. Latin America is full of great legends who have conquered multiple categories such as IndyCar, Formula One endurance racing, and many more. And in the previous episode of the El Camino series, we told you about one of the greatest legends that Colombia has given to the world of motorsports, if not the greatest. Juan Pablo Montoya, who burst onto the Formula One scene in 2001, making a big entrance and battling against the greatest titans that the top category of motorsports had at that time. But this series must go on. And just as we have paid tribute to a Colombian legend, it's time to do the same with the greatest Argentine legend that not only Formula One, but I would dare to say the world of motorsports in general, has ever had. The greatest champion this region of the planet has ever had, and one of the most highly regarded drivers in the entire history of motorsports. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to learn about the journey of the motorsport legend nicknamed El Maestro or El Chueco, but whose name is Juan Manuel Fangio. The first Formula One world champion from Latin America and currently the third driver with the most world titles in the history of the top motorsport discipline. In this short video, we will recall his racing career that made him one of the greatest drivers ever seen. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 9 of The Road of Juan Manuel Fangio.
The Japanese Grand Prix, Italy is celebrating. Impressive Kimi this weekend, did everything.
I know that many of you, when you heard this, immediately thought of the song "There's Nothing Harder Than Living Without You." And it's because the Formula One commentary that many fans in Mexico have known for so many years will practically be forced to say goodbye in 2026 due to rights issues and all those things we all know about. However, if I'm watching this from my computer at home in Mexico, believe me, you can do it too. And you can avoid that horrible farewell that was saying goodbye to the broadcasts as we knew them, because there's a way to bypass those annoying regional blocks and browse the internet with complete freedom using a very powerful tool that fortunately our friends at Surfshark have. Let me explain quickly. The tool in question is a VPN or virtual private network that, among many of its features, its main one is the ability to change your IP and virtually place you anywhere in the world. In the case of the previous example, if you want to watch alternative commentaries to those on Formula One television or Televisa, which are currently available in Mexico, Disney Plus has commentary with the Tornillo team, but only in Argentina and South America. To have it available in Mexico, you just need to go to this platform, change your IP, and set it to Argentina or any country in South America. And in no time, with these simple steps, you'll be able to enjoy Formula One on this platform with the commentary you've always known. In fact, it also works to unlock any region-locked content, like tweets that aren't available in your country, websites, or movies from streaming platforms. This tool is capable of unlocking, freeing your browsing and your potential behavior on internet. But really, you should be the one to try it. And if you go to surfshark.com Skyline Racing and use my code Skyline Racing, you'll get 4 extra months when you sign up for this service, so you can try it on an unlimited number of devices. Try it for a month, and if you don't like it or you're not convinced, you have a full money-back guarantee. So I invite you to give the advantages and benefits of having a VPN a try, thanks to our friends at Surfshark. As always, before we start with this story, we have to do a brief review of the biography of the pilot who is the protagonist of this edition of The Road. And our protagonist was born on June 24, 1911 in the city of Valcasi, Argentina. His grandparents came from Italy until they settled in Argentina in 1987, where his father was Loreto Fangio and his mother was Herminia de Ramo. Who would be the parents of Juan Manuel Fangio? What would the fourth child of this marriage be? During Fangio's childhood, besides studying, he also helped by working to contribute to the family economy. And from the age of 9, he started working in a blacksmith shop where they serviced local carriages and did all kinds of metal forging. So he combined his studies with work until 1922, when he started working at Capitini's mechanical workshop. This was where he began working with vehicles and where Fangio gradually fell in love with automobiles, which brought him joy, an inexplicable passion. Shortly after, he joined the rugby dealership to continue working, but now as an assistant to Raimundo Carlini. And it was right here where he learned to drive vehicles, since the latter would ask him to drive when they went from home. He learned a lot and felt that the car came to life when he handled it. And by 1924, he started working at a Ford dealership where he gained knowledge about how engines worked and how to work on them. It was at the age of 16 when he got his first job. He received a vehicle as payment for his wages, and it was a 4-cylinder Overland. And thanks to the knowledge he had previously acquired working at the dealerships, he modified it to turn it into a race car. However, it would not be an easy year for Chueco, as he fell ill with pleurisy, forcing him to rest from his activities for a long year. And another of Fangio's passions was soccer, as he played with his friends at some local clubs. But his passion for automobiles made him return to this world to compete in his first official race. In 1929, he did so as the co-driver of Manuel Ayerza aboard a 1928 Chevrolet. The race took place between the cities of Coronel Vidal and General Guido, where both finished in second place overall in the competition. And in 1930, he returned as the co-driver of his brother-in-law Jose Brujas Font on a dirt track aboard a 1929 Plymouth. These were his first experiences in the world of competitive motorsports, after these experiences of falling ill again, recovering, and completing his military service. By 1932, he founded his first mechanical workshop together with his friend José Dufar, and by 1934 its growth was quite good, leading him to move the workshop to the city and combine his activities with his other passion at the time, which was soccer. Until in 1936, Fangio decided to participate in races again, but this time as a driver, competing under the pseudonym Rivadavia and driving a 1920 Ford A in the Benito Juarez circuit, where, due to a melted connecting rod, they had to abandon the race when they were in third place. And later, in another race at the La Chata circuit, they had a similar mishap when the gearbox failed and got practically stuck in third gear. It wasn't until 1938 that he officially took part in a race at the Necochea circuit, and he began to participate in what was called road tourism, one of the oldest competitions in the world of motorsports. And here, Fangio saw a huge opportunity for his tire workshop business. Winning these competitions would boost his business reputation and attract potential customers. By 1940, he won his first road racing competition, winning the International Northern Prize. He was crowned champion. And a year later, he repeated by being crowned the Argentine road racing champion. And with the money he was earning, he paid for the cars he competed with, as well as the loans and interest from his workshop. His business became increasingly profitable. However, in 1942, motorsport activities were suspended due to the consequences of World War II, and unfortunately, that didn't just affect his passion, but also his business, which he had to close in 1943 because of the war. He survived by making trips to the south of the country to acquire trailer trucks, interested in the tires that were scarce at that time because of the war. It wasn't until 46 that he was able to return to the world of motorsports once the war was over. He participated in several national competitions such as the Palermo Autumn Grand Prix, the 1,000 Beach Miles in Necochea, and the Mercedes City Grand Prix. In fact, these last three competitions were races won by Fangio upon his return to motorsports. But also, for the first time in his life, he had an international presence, because in 1947, he traveled with the Automobile Club of Argentina to France, where the Italian-French driver and mechanic Amadeo Gordini invited him to participate in the French Grand Prix at the Rennes circuit. It was his first international Grand Prix, which he couldn't finish, but it made him stand out across the ocean, as he was invited to participate in more Grand Prix-type competitions. He managed to achieve up to 5 victories, which quickly put him on the international map and opened the door for him to the place that soon would be considered the Olympus of motorsport and the place where Fangio would become a true legend of racing. During the late 1940s, the top officials of motorsport in the world, led by the newly appointed International Automobile Federation, they had the idea of reviving an old pre-war concept, an official, point-scoring championship that would bring together the biggest stars in motorsport and the best car manufacturers. But unlike previous attempts, like the European Drivers' Championship, this time they aimed to create an international championship to give greater status to what was about to be born in 1950. It would be none other than what we know today as Formula One. For this first edition of the International Formula One Championship, several constructors would enter the category, interested in testing their most powerful vehicles. Among them were brands like Ferrari, Maserati and Alfa Romeo, with the latter having developed the Alfa Romeo 158 Alfetta. And before participating in the Formula One World Championship, the Italian brand decided to test the single-seater in a well-known race, the San Remo Grand Prix, and thanks to the reputation that Juan Manuel Fangio had earned in Europe. That's why he was chosen to test the car in this non-championship Grand Prix race. And Fangio did not disappoint, because even though he raced alone, he took a convincing victory, which quickly led Alfa Romeo to make the decision to sign him for the first season of the Formula One World Championship. Since they believed that Fangio had shown a lot of speed both in that test and in other European competitions in which he had participated. And they believed that his speed would be key to achieving success in this new World Championship that was about to begin. Therefore, Fangio would join the Alfa Romeo team in the 1950 season. The debut of the World Championship, sharing the team with the Italians Luigi Fagioli and Giuseppe Farina, the 1950 season would begin at the legendary Silverstone circuit, an old Royal Air Force airfield from World War II. In this race, it quickly became clear that the Alfa Romeos were several steps ahead of their rivals, and the fight for the title would be a battle between their drivers. The first ever Formula One duel was ultimately won by the Italian, where Fangio unfortunately had a reliability problem that kept him from finishing that race. Nevertheless, Fangio, he would see his moment of glory immediately after in the second race, taking pole position at the Monaco Grand Prix and winning the race the next day. A race where, in fact, there was an unusual situation. There was a huge crash on the first lap because a wave hit the Monaco harbor and left the track very wet, and it caused several drivers to lose control and end up crashing. When Fangio was approaching this part of the circuit, thanks to the reaction of the crowd, he realized something was happening. So he slowed down to get through the area without getting caught in the crash. It was a very smart reaction that allowed him to take his first victory, and the crowd quickly realized that this would become a one-on-one duel between him and Giuseppe Farina. Both of them fought for that first Formula One World Championship where Giuseppe won the Swiss Grand Prix. He retired, but the Argentine responded with two convincing victories in the French Grand Prix and the Belgian Grand Prix. This allowed him and Farina to reach the last race of the year, both with a chance to become world champions. So the first great rivalry in the history of the top category would have its outcome at the Italian Grand Prix, which unfortunately, it was not a completely positive race for the Argentine driver, because during the race, his car had gearbox problems that forced him to abandon the competition for the first time. In those years, there was a possibility that if you abandoned the competition, you could take the car of a rival or a teammate if they allowed it and continue the Grand Prix. And that's what Fangio ended up doing. Alfa Romeo in that Grand Prix had put the driver Piero Taruffi in the car. When he saw Fangio had left the competition, he gave him his single-seater so the Argentine could keep fighting for the driver's title. But unfortunately, as they say, if it's not your turn, nothing you do will make it happen, even with a gesture. Fangio failed, causing his second retirement, and with this, there was nothing he could do to prevent Nino Farina from taking the victory at the Italian Grand Prix. And with this, he had the honor of becoming the first world champion in the history of Formula One. Unfortunately, Fangio's fight did not result in the driver's title, but he managed to finish second, making him the first runner-up in the history of Formula One. However, a year later, he would have his long-awaited rematch. El Chueco stayed with the Alfa Romeo team to compete in the 1951 season, a season where he now became involved in a duel against the Italian driver Alberto Ascari and his compatriot José Fruilán González. This time, his Alfa Romeo was no longer as dominant as the one he had driven a year before. But even so, despite the fight for the title going all the way to the last race of the season, Fangio would achieve victory at the Spanish Grand Prix. And thanks to this and his other two wins at the Swiss Grand Prix and the French Grand Prix, plus the two podiums he earned at the British Grand Prix and the German Grand Prix, El Chueco was making history. And he achieved his first Drivers' World Championship by being crowned champion of the 1951 season, becoming the second world champion in the history of Formula One and the first Latin American to ever achieve it. Fangio, without knowing it, had written his name in gold letters in what would later become the most important and profitable motorsport product that has ever existed in history. But for him, this was not the end. It was the beginning of a path that would bring him success and glory in abundance, although before he could continue reaping success, Unfortunately, in 1952, life would make him stop his racing activities for a long time, sadly for El Chueco, during a race that was taking place at the Monza circuit. At the wheel of a Maserati team car, he had a terrible accident at the Esmo curve, where his car flipped over and he was thrown out of it. And he ended up with serious injuries after that horrible accident, where fortunately, despite how dramatic it was, Fangio was able to save his life, although he had very serious injuries that would make him retire from competitions in 1952 at least for a few months, so he returned to Argentina to recover from his injuries. Once he recovered, he was able to participate in some local competitions in Argentina, where he even managed to win races like the Gran Premio Presidente Perón and a few more races in Uruguay. And once he was fully recovered, he would return to Formula 1 in 1953, but since Alfa Romeo had withdrawn from Formula 1 competitions, this time he would participate with the Maserati team, thanks to the good relationship he had with them, and obviously with the goal of reclaiming the crown, which he had won in 1951. However, this was not an easy year at all for the Argentine. His Ferrari dominated the first part of the season, while the first races of Juan Manuel Fangio ended with 3 consecutive retirements in the Grand Prix of Argentina, the Netherlands, and Belgium. Although he bounced back in the second half with 2 podiums and a win at the Italian Grand Prix, he ultimately finished as world runner-up. He was defeated by the Italian driver Alberto Ascari, who retained the crown he had won the previous season. However, in 1954 is where the huge streak of consecutive successes would begin for the Argentine, which established him as one of the greatest in the history of Formula 1. Originally, the Argentine driver was going to race for the Mercedes team that season, but at least at the beginning, their cars were not finished. So he started the year racing again with the Maserati team, and his pursuit of the 1954 title, he would start off on the right foot, winning the Argentine Grand Prix. It was the first time that Juan Manuel Fangio managed to win in front of his home crowd as a Formula 1 driver, and despite not competing in the Indianapolis 500 in the third race of the season at the Belgian circuit, he managed to repeat his victory, which would consolidate him as the leader of the world drivers' standings. But once the French Grand Prix arrived, Mercedes already had their cars ready. That was when Juan Manuel Fangio switched from Maserati to Mercedes for the rest of the 1954 season. Even with the change of constructor, it was a dominant year for the Argentine driver. In his debut as a Mercedes driver, he started by winning the French Grand Prix. Later, he achieved 4th place in the British Grand Prix. And from there, he went on to win 3 consecutive races in Germany, Switzerland, and Italy. He finished the year with a podium in the Spanish Grand Prix and achieved victory in a completely dominant fashion. His second Formula 1 World Champion title, beating his fellow countryman José Froilán González by a wide margin. For 1955, he would compete with the Mercedes team, this time as a full-time driver, driving the Mercedes M196. But that 1955 was a difficult year, not in terms of competitiveness, but because of what would happen with the German team in motorsport competitions. It was precisely in that 1955 when Mercedes would also participate in the 24 Hours of Le Mans, in a race where, in fact, Juan Manuel Fangio would be racing, representing the Star brand, but it was the race. One of the German brand's cars ended up being involved in a horrible accident where, right on the main straight, one of the cars crashed into another and at the speed the car was going. It ended up being thrown into the crowd, killing people who had attended the race, killing the driver instantly, and leaving the car engulfed in a ball of fire. It was one of the most shocking and horrifying accidents ever seen in motorsport history, which caused not only some international competitions in Europe to be cancelled, but also led the German brand to withdraw from all motorsport when 1955 ended. Despite the tragedy, the Formula 1 season went on and Fangio ended up becoming world champion, scoring 4 victories and another podium throughout the season. He earned 40 points and won by a wide margin over his teammate Stirling Moss. With that, he achieved his 3rd Formula 1 World Championship. After Mercedes-Benz withdrew, keeping their promise to leave motorsport, Fangio was left without a team, but he had plenty of options to continue in the category, and he ended up joining Scuderia Ferrari. They offered him a contract to compete in 1956, so by this point Fangio had already raced for brands like Alfa Romeo, Maserati, Mercedes, and now also Ferrari. He would drive the cars of the prancing horse. However, that year would be very complicated for Fangio, as the car designed by the Italian brand was very difficult to drive. Y tenía graves problemas de fiabilidad. This made the relationship between him, Enzo Ferrari, and the team manager, Geraldo Scolati, quite problematic. The Ferrari cars broke down too often during the Grand Prix races and throughout several races in 1956. The Argentine ended up getting into his teammates' cars to be able to finish the races and thus try to fight for the title that season. The situation ended up becoming so tense that for Fangio to keep driving the Ferrari cars, he demanded that they assign a mechanic exclusively for his car so that he could work better. And with that, improve the performance of the car on the track, which turned out to be the right decision since the car's competitiveness improved a lot after that request. However, in 1956, he was involved in a tough battle for the driver's title between himself, Peter Collins, and Stirling Moss, with whom he fought until the last race of that season. The final round of the championship is the Italian Grand Prix at Monza, where all three could become world champions. For his part, Fangio would achieve pole position for that Grand Prix, and even though at the start he was overtaken by his teammates, Fangio focused on running a smart race. To try to win the World Drivers' Championship and taking advantage of several battles happening in front of him, Fangio managed to regain the lead of the race. But unfortunately, Ferrari's poor reliability was evident in that Grand Prix, forcing Fangio to retire due to a car problem. Something strange happened. He was going to lose the World Drivers' Championship in the last race of the year. At this particular point in the race, Peter Collins, who was his teammate, was still fighting for the crown. He would now be fighting against Stirling Moss. But knowing that he had to win that race, set the fastest lap, and that he was in third place with 15 laps to go, he decided to make a decision that the Argentine would never forget. He went into the pits, got out of his car, and handed it over to Juan Manuel Fangio.
Mejores posibilidades para llevarse el título de piloto
for the Italian brand. So Fangio ended up accepting, and with all the grit and desire to be champion, he stayed on track, managing to finish in second place, which was the result he needed to secure his fourth driver's title and become the world champion of the 1956 season, this time with the prancing horse. If it hadn't been for the good gesture that Peter Collins had with him, he would have ended up losing the crown to Stirling Moss. But Fangio was such a respected driver that these kinds of actions were quite common around him. And even though Peter was involved in the fight for the title and had a chance to be champion, he didn't hesitate to get out and give his seat to Fangio so that he, with better opportunities, could go and seal that title. That was the respect he had worked so hard for and that the Argentine had earned with his talent, his speed, and his humility. Those qualities gave him that opportunity, which made him a four-time world champion in 1956. However, due to the bad relationship that existed throughout the year between the Italian team's management and the Argentine driver, in 1957 Fangio would return to the Maserati team to drive the car that he himself had in his hands and with which he won the first races of 1954. This was before moving to the Mercedes team, which also turned into a year of domination by the Argentine over his rivals thanks to 4 victories in the season in the Grand Prix of Argentina, Monaco, France and Germany. In addition to 2 more podiums in the Pescara Grand Prix and the Italian Grand Prix, Fangio ended up adding 40 valid points, which allowed him to become a 5-time Formula One world champion, achieving a truly historic milestone that, to this day, he is seen as the 3rd driver with the most world titles in the history of Formula One. So in more than 75 years of history, only 2 drivers are above him when it comes to world titles. And during those 7 years as a Formula One driver, Fangio made sure to win and win as much as possible, which allowed him to get those 5 crowns with 4 different teams, which were Alfa Romeo, Maserati, Mercedes and Ferrari. Winning his last world title at the age of 46, which currently makes him the oldest world champion in Formula One history, and obviously as one of the greatest champions when it comes to numbers. However, every story, no matter how successful, comes to an end sooner or later, and Fangio's story ended in 1958, a year in which he still participated in some competitions, both in Argentina, as well as in the Formula One World Championship, and after being kidnapped in Cuba before the Cuban Grand Prix, after the Formula One competition at the French Grand Prix. He ended up retiring for good from the world of motorsport, to which Fangio had practically dedicated a life full of successes that earned him respect, who at that time shared the track with him, but also from future generations who always saw him as a legend or as a hero, even as a driver beyond the ordinary. Drivers like Ayrton Senna, Alain Prost, and even more recently, drivers like Sebastian Vettel have always remembered and acknowledged that Fangio is one of the greatest legends that Formula One has ever had, and that his legacy is very difficult for anyone to surpass. After his retirement, Fangio was still involved in the world of motorsport. or as part of the organization of some events in the world of motorsport. So even though he had his story as a driver in 1958, Fangio could never completely detach himself from the passion he had, and he never wanted to leave the world of motorsport entirely. It's clear that throughout all the years after his retirement, Fangio received numerous tributes, both from different brands like Mercedes and from various organizations both international and local. They never got tired of honoring a legend like Juan Manuel Fangio. In fact, during his last years, he ended up forging a great friendship with Ayrton Senna, whom he always saw as the driver who would set the standard. Since he burst onto the top category of motorsport in 1984, he never hesitated to advise him, to guide him, and more than anything else, he never hesitated to be his friend. They were two drivers who recognized each other, where El Chueco never hesitated to point out that Senna, sooner or later, he would become the best driver in the history of Formula One, and without fear, he considered him directly his heir or his successor. And unfortunately, on July 17, 1995, after a respiratory crisis, Fangio ended up passing away at the age of 84 in Buenos Aires, Argentina. The life of the Argentine driver recognized all over the world, for a unique and never-before-seen talent behind the wheel of a race car had come to an end at that moment. But his legacy and his legend have not disappeared.
Sino que al paso de los años no han hecho
to grow and grow, since he has never stopped being recognized internationally as one of the best drivers the world of motorsport has ever seen. In summary, the story of Fangio is the story of a man who never stopped fighting with outstanding talent and radiant humility. The story of a man who took advantage of the opportunities he had when he had them. And thanks to his overwhelming talent, he managed to write a story that, to this day, many other Formula One drivers have not been able to surpass, even now. And having had a long and successful career in such a difficult and deadly era, as it was when Chueco competed in motorsports, is probably his greatest achievement in life. A success that never went to his head, because besides being fast, Fangio was always known for knowing how to treat people and for recognizing the talent of others. A man with great wisdom, one of his best quotes is, "You should always try to be the best, but never believe you are the best." That practically reflects his entire life. Of a man who was the best behind the wheel during the years he was active in motorsports, but even with that, he was respected by rival teams, by the public, and by his fellow drivers. He lived around the Argentine star, being a man who knew how to treat his team with respect. He was tough against his competitors, but always respectful, and that allowed him to. That everyone always recognized him, both for his talent and for his attitude on and off the track. Fangio made sure to write throughout all these years an unforgettable story that will last through the ages, and he will definitely continue to be one of the greatest drivers in Formula One history. As I told you, even after so many years since he left the world of motorsports, his record and his legacy are even greater than those of many other drivers who came after him. So I truly believe that the life of Juan Manuel Fangio has been the life of a prodigy who managed to earn everything with his talent, his skill, and his humility. A respect rarely seen in the world of motorsports. But ladies and gentlemen, with this we finish chapter 9 of The Road. But this is where I ask you, did you know Juan Manuel Fangio's story and talent? What are your thoughts on his journey? Share your opinions on the Argentine driver's life and career in the comments. We look forward to reading them all. That's all from me. I say goodbye, announcing that the next chapter of The Road will come out sometime this year, and it will be dedicated to Nico Rosberg, the champion of the 2016 Formula One season. But if you like this video, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel, turn on notifications so you know when I'm uploading a new video, and share this with your friends. I also invite you to follow us on our Instagram and Twitter accounts, the links to which will be in the description of this video. And I'll see you soon for more episodes recapping the history of Formula One drivers. Thank you for tuning in. See you later.